But the goal is to just make my own stuff and make my own way. Stand on my own to have it be my stories that people are coming around for. They don't just like My Little Pony or they don't just like Star Wars. They're there because they like the stuff I do.
Welcome to Flip Your Script, the podcast about life's critical turning points and how people find the inspiration and motivation to move forward and rewrite their unique stories. Flip Your Script is produced by Media Minefield, a public relations firm passionate about the power of sharing stories. Specializing in earned and social media, Media Minefield helps clients take control of their unique story and message. The show is hosted by Christy Peel, founder and CEO of Media Minefield, who flipped her script from an Emmy-winning journalist to a successful entrepreneur and speaker.
A long time ago in a galaxy far away, there was a man creating graphics for news broadcasts, and when he wasn't on his computer, he was holding a pen and drawing art on paper. When I say a long time ago, I mean the late 90s. And the galaxy, well, that was Kello TV in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I called him Tone Loc because I was in that same galaxy on the anchor desk. His real name is Tony Fleecs, and he's now the man behind the art of My Little Pony and Star Wars comics, and he has a book coming out. Tony, welcome to the Flip Your Script podcast.
Hey, Christy, I'm excited to be here.
See what I did with that Star Wars intro? Creative,
Long time
right?
ago. I liked it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hot people are very Star Wars right now. Mandalorian, it's huge.
The Mandalorian is awesome. And you probably don't remember, but we were big Star Wars people. We had Yoda the dog when I knew you and saw you. And then we had Vader the dog. And now we have Boba Fett the dog, who we call Bo. So it's a lot of Star Wars in my house. A lot of Star Wars. The whole thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Like this, your story is so good for this podcast and just for people in general to hear, because you were really entry level, like I was at this television station. And now you're like a really big deal signing autographs. And I found something of yours signed on Amazon. I mean, it's kind of cool. So how did you take what you were doing in the newsroom and get to where you are today? Because it's just fascinating. And congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Well, to clarify, anybody that makes a comic book will sign that comic book. So just having made a comic book in the first place, that stuff would be out there for sure. So, but I'm doing pretty good. And I guess starting at the newsroom, that was my first real job. Like I made like $11 an hour to start. And that was amazing to me, right? In 1999. And then I worked at that job for 6 years, and I had gone to art school, and that was the first job I could get that had anything to do with art, because it was graphics. And but like for the people listening, like that means we made the over-the-shoulder graphics for news broadcasts, and we made full-screen graphics that had information or maps, and you would have to do them sometimes pretty fast because there'd be breaking news. That's what that job was. And so when I first got there, I was just so excited to be working in a job that incorporated my art training. So I was psyched because, I was 19, 20 years old. And so I just started working there, and I worked there for 6 years, basically like the better part of my 20s. But like halfway through, I realized that like, oh, this isn't what I set out to do. I just sort of got diverted this way because it was a job that was an art job. I went to school and had always intended to make comic books. And I realized that wasn't going to happen if I was just working at the news. But the cool thing about the news was that my boss, John Miller, had told me that I could just use the equipment there, like in my off hours. So I didn't have a computer at the time because, I was broke. I was a kid. And so
$11 an hour.
Yeah.
It's a lot of hours for a computer.
Even for like a gateway or whatever the hot computer was back then. So I started working on my own stuff. I would start making illustrations and comics and stuff. And I would draw them at home, and then I would bring them into the graphics department and scan them in. And then after I'd finish my shift, I would just hang around later and use the news station's Photoshop and computers and stuff like that. And that's basically how I made all my first comic book work. And then the first thing that got published and what sort of kicked off my career, I made in that same graphics department.
What was interesting, what I remember about working with you, besides, I know we had a lot of fun. on the weekends and such. And it was a great crew. But you're one of those people who I knew, and I think we all knew, that you were capable of so much more because you were always working on your art, and your art was always so good and you could do it so quickly. And not to say that people who works in graphics departments and newsrooms aren't talented, because they certainly are. But there was just a sense that you were going to do more than that. And I don't mean that in a negative way to people in news. I mean it in, there was a piece of you that news couldn't capture because, I mean, let's be honest, the graphics, they're generally not that interesting. I mean, there's so many parameters that you can't really explore your creative side. So it's so cool to see that you were able to, that you didn't give up on that, because some people could give up on it and then stay doing what they're doing, but you kept after it.
Well, luckily, the job was just like it was paid just enough that I could survive on, but it wasn't enough to be so satisfying that I was just like, oh, I'll just do this forever, you know? And also it was much more of a craft, like honing your craft and being great at your craft than an art, you know? Like you were saying, the parameters were such that it would just be like, we need a graphic of George W. Bush. And then we already had that picture, but this one's supposed to say, you know, like hit by a shoe, you know? So then we just change the text on it, and that would be my job. And I'm called a graphic artist, but there's not a whole lot of art to it, you know? It's more typing and moving files around and stuff. So the part of me that's an artist that had always sort of been the largest part of me, that sort of like my place I go to when my creative place or like my Zen place or whatever, that wasn't necessarily fulfilled by the work that I was doing there. But the thing that was fulfilled was that I could say, like, I'm a working artist and I made a living at it. And so it sort of propelled me to try and do my own stuff, was that I was just like, well, I don't want to do this for forever. But I was also very grateful to be there, you know, at the time, because I applied for all kinds of art jobs, and that was the only one that even called me back, you know. So,
and that's a special newsroom. I mean, it was one of my favorite places to work, and a lot of good people are still there, and so it's awesome that that's where you started. So you use the off hours, which I guess I didn't know that that's what you were doing in your off hours. So bravo to you. We all went out to have like quarter beers somewhere, and you're like back working. I feel kind of lame now, but way to go for working hard.
I would do that too. But then after the bar, I would go home and get back to work. And then after, like I said, I would take that stuff into the office and do my digital stuff at the office. Eventually, though, the station came under new management, and the new manager lady, whose name I can't remember, she walked by and just saw me working on my own stuff, and she was like, "What's this?" I was like, "Oh, this is John Miller said it's okay. I can use the computers to do my own stuff." She's like, "Oh," and then the next day I came in and all my stuff was completely gone, like deleted, erased from the server. Yeah, but it was after I had finished my first comic and sent it off to the printer. So it was sort of like Indiana Jones grabbing the hat, you know, like I, in the nick of time, got everything out of there. There's still stuff that I would have liked to have, but she was not down with that plan. So if you're planning on working at Kello TV and using their computers in your off time now, I feel like that policy is no longer in effect.
Well, and let's just take a minute to shame on her, whose name we don't know, which is a good thing, because she could have given you warning. I mean, all she would have had to say is like, hey, starting next week, it's no longer allowed. Fine, but you don't delete people's work.
At the time, I was furious, but it is the thing that made me just go like, okay, well, I'm going to move on now. Because I was so mad about it that I was just like, I can't, like, it would be toxic for me to come in here all the time and work in this place, you know, after they did that to me. So that was sort of a couple months later, that's when I moved. That's when I put in my notice. And
where did you go? So you, at this point, have something completed, a complete comic book. What do you do with it?
This is in 2006. My first comic book, it was an autobiographical comic that I did that was just about me in those days, like getting into adventures in Sioux Falls and running around with my friends and stuff. And that came out through a publisher and like in comic stores, a real small publisher, but in 2006. And it got noticed on the internet and in magazines and stuff. And so I thought, even though it didn't make any money, I was just like, oh, I work in comics now, so I'll just go do that. And at that same time, my friend Nick had gotten accepted to the American Film Institute in LA, and he needed like a roommate. And so I was just like, well, I'll go with, because I work in comics now, so I'll just go to LA where they make entertainment. And that's dumb because I like basically quit my job at Kello. I had probably $2,000 saved up, and our first last month's rent and everything was about $1,500. So I just had like $500 to sort of get my life figured out in LA. And I didn't have any jobs lined up. I was just like, oh, I'll just go do artwork out here, and somehow figured it out eventually. But it went through some pretty lean times.
You know what's great about the woman who deleted your stuff is that she gave you the kick that you needed. And people sometimes, I lost my job in television after 12 years of doing it, and then started the company. And people ask me what I think about the people who fired me and laid me off. And, I am grateful. Like really grateful, because if they hadn't done that, I would still be doing that. And I wouldn't have realized what I think at this moment I'm on the planet to do. But that's a mindset, because I could still be really bitter and angry, and I'm not at all. I'm really grateful. And I hear you saying the same thing, that you were mad at the time. She gave you a gift, really, ultimately, because she pushed you out and made you realize, okay, it's time to go, which is not everyone gets that, which is why people stay in careers 20 years longer than they should, probably. Some people.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I said, at the time I was really mad, and then it didn't take me too long to be like, oh, I'm kind of glad that happened, because, but it definitely, I didn't start thinking that way until things started to get pretty good as my comic book career went along. If I had just came out here and been a huge failure, I would have been like, well, I still would have been working at my job if this lady hadn't deleted all my stuff.
Then you would remember her name, because you'd be stalking her and you'd be sitting outside her house and throwing eggs at her house.
I would know her first and last name.
And her social security number. Also, what's important, I think, about what you said is that you weren't satisfied. And sometimes not being satisfied is financial, because it does force you to do it forces you to get scrappier than maybe you would if you were getting trust fund money or something. So you're broke in LA, and then you have to figure it out. How did you do that and not give it up and say, you know what, I'm just going to go get a safe job?
Well, when I got out here, safe job doesn't really, I got like a part-time job that was in the same vein as the news job. It was just making, like I said, a craft, like I'm making graphics, I'm putting stuff together. That was a skill I had. And so I had a friend that worked at a company that sort of like put me onto this job where I could just go in and make these graphics and make enough money to pay rent some of the time. And then the rest of the time was all scrambling for freelance and stuff. And I would get some comic book work. But the good thing about it was, making my first comic, I did almost the whole thing myself. And so if somebody needed me to do, like, instead of just hiring me to make the comic book, if they said, hey, we have a comic, but we need somebody to put the letters on it, or we have a comic and we need somebody to color it or do any of the things, because I made the whole thing myself on mine, I knew how to do all the stuff. And so I could take these little sort of smaller jobs, just doing the lettering or just doing the coloring. And so I did a few stuff, like a few projects like that, but mostly coming from being in a structured, like 40-hour-a-week full-time job to being a full-time freelancer and living in a new town and like living in a big city, for the first time since college, I sort of got a little bit like, I went off track a little bit in that I just I wasn't like self-motivated enough to be a freelancer yet. And so because I didn't have to be at work at 9 a.m. or at 1 p.m. as my Kello one was when I left, I just would take a week and just like, well, I'll just watch all of Gilmore Girls, or like, I'll just take a week and just, do whatever. It's not like I was getting into dark. I wasn't on drugs or anything, but I was just sort of like, didn't have any place to be. So I would just chill and do nothing. And I wouldn't even do my own artwork. I was just sort of like, I don't think I was depressed, but I was just directionless, because I'd been so used to somebody saying like I was a self-starter making my own stuff, my own comics, but that was like my own thing. And then looking for freelance work is different, because you're just reaching out to people or having reoccurring regular clients come to you. And I didn't have that set up yet. And I didn't know what the deal was, how I was going to make it work until I started working at a studio with some friends out here. It used to be right next door to the place that I live now. I moved very close to it because I was just like, oh, I'll just be here all the time. And so this friend I knew from comics was working in this studio, which was just in a guy's garage. They made comics in there. And he was like, come by and draw with us. And I went in, and there were two of them there, and one always had his rent paid, and the other one was an incredible artist but didn't have a steady income as the other one. And the one that always had his rent paid just worked 24/7. And I was like, that looks hard. But then I was like, well, let me give it a shot. And what I realized was, and this isn't really healthy interpersonally or like in relationships, but if it's the thing you love to do, they say it's like, it's not work if you love it, which is not true. But you can still, it's work, but it's not like you're just gonna be like, I gotta stop this, like you can just keep doing it. And that's what I found out. So I ended up just working at that studio for 10 years or so, and just working every day, all day long on whatever came along. And then work sort of begat work, like once I had the ball rolling, other stuff came along, and,
How did you motivate yourself from being in the I can do whatever I want, I'm going to do nothing mindset to I could work all the time and I actually like it more when I'm working all the time? Because it must have been hard for you not only to not be productive, because you are such a productive person, but also you weren't making art, and art is such a part of who you are.
Yeah, and I wasn't making money, and that was the real, I mean, not to be crass, but that was a real motivator. Just like the stress of being broke and having to call my mom for help with the cable bill or whatever. Once I realized that, like, oh, if I just did this thing I love to do all the time anyway, then I won't have to ask anybody for help anymore. Like I can just do this and sort of be on my own feet. And so that was sort of the move. Once I figured that out, and it seems very obvious, right? Like if you just work a lot, you won't have to worry about money. But at the time it was like, I couldn't work a lot because I didn't have the work set up, like I didn't have the clients, I didn't have the jobs. And so it took me sort of getting in and just being in a place where work was happening and working, and just, like if I didn't have a job that day, I would still draw, and then a job would come along, which isn't like that's not a plan I could really write down for somebody, like, oh, just go draw somewhere and then you'll be able to pay your bills. But that seemed to be how it ended up working out for me.
So would you be where you are right now if you were somehow independently wealthy and didn't need to work to eat?
Well, no, when it comes to my own stuff, like the stories that I tell that are creator owned, I feel like those might still happen. But I also think if I wasn't, like if I didn't have to worry about paying my bills, I probably would take less of the work for hire jobs. But also, I don't know, that's a pretty deep question, because then it's also like how much of the work that I do is informed by the hustle and like the grinding and sort of like how much of that informs my character and then the characters that I create. So I don't know. I definitely think I would still be making comics. Like we always talk about what we do if we were rich, like if we hit the lottery or whatever. And I always imagine that I'll still be making comics because I have all these stories I want to tell. But yeah, I would probably do less comics for other people. Like right now I'm working on Rick and Morty comics and My Little Pony comics at the same time as I'm doing my own stuff. And that's just to keep money rolling, keep bills being paid, because my own stuff doesn't pay until after the people buy it. Like it comes out, we'll talk about it later, but it comes out through a publisher that they don't take any of your profits, but they also don't pay anything up front. So you're just waiting for the money to come in afterwards. So that means in the meantime, I have to do all the same work for hire stuff and draw licensed comics. And if I was independently wealthy, I would probably just only focus on my own stuff.
You said something really interesting in there, and I want to make sure that I highlight it. I think I'm saying this correctly. It feels like the stuff that you're creating now, the stories and the characters are better because you had to struggle and hustle and more deep. And that's so true in like life too. Like our stories as humans are better, and we're, I would argue, better people because we've gone through some stuff and are out the other side. Because your characters are, and what I've seen about, the book that's coming out, there's some grit there
Hmm.
that might not have been there had you not had to live through some things.
I think the characters are more informed, and then my character is more informed from the hustle and the grind. But different levels of hustle and grind. Like it could. I don't think everybody's better for having to hustle necessarily, and depending on how, like, what their situation is and what their hustle is. You know,
Well, that's fair.
yeah. But yeah, I definitely think that like the part of the work that is most informed by the hustle is the actual hard work and hustle of it, because it's like a self-motivated thing. Like making my own comics, it's the same thing as when I would sit around and watch Gilmore Girls for a whole week. Nobody's telling me to do it. It's just me. I don't have a boss on that, so I have to just make goals for myself, or sit down and say, like, this week I got to get this thing done, or today I got to get this thing done, just so that it keeps getting done, because there's no editor that says where are these pages.
So back in the day, you had a lot of fans in the newsroom because we all knew that our graphics were going to look good and they were going to be spelled right. And if George Bush had a shoe coming at him, you'd get the right shoe. So you're used to having fans, but not like you have fans now. So you're like the guy behind how My Little Pony looks. You're doing stuff for Star Wars. You just talked about Rick and Morty. Is it weird to be an artist with fans? Or is that, I mean, you're in LA, so maybe just everybody lives like that. I don't know.
It is weird, but because of the way my like self-esteem works, I just think of it as like, oh, they're fans of Star Wars, or they're fans of My Little Pony, and like I have that job, which is cool, and like it's not easy to get, but I don't. It hasn't gone to my head where I just wake up and go like, well, I'm a person with fans, like I'm sure there are some people that come around for my stuff specifically, but for the most part, up until now, I've been able to just go like, well, they like Pinkie Pie, or they like Luke Skywalker or whatever. Like I don't have to shoulder the burden of that fandom or whatever. It is weird
Which,
though.
let's just say that if I had your job, I would kill all of the fans. I mean, I don't mean like physically kill them. Like they would no longer be fans because it would look so terrible. I would crush all of their love of any of the things I'm working on. So you've probably helped grow people who already like Luke Skywalker. You express him in a different way than in the
Sure.
movies, or, so there's, I don't know. I think what you do is really cool. And I've seen you actually draw, and I remember even back in the day, like it's cool to watch you work because your brain sees things that other people's don't. So you go to actual like comic events, right? And sign people's things and take selfies with people.
Well, I used to,
What?
yeah.
Well, when there were like when you
Yeah.
could see
When
people,
we
yeah,
used to go around people.
right. When that was right a thing.
Yeah.
But now you're working on your own book, which is new for you. Tell me, I read about it, but tell me about it. And that's going to take your career potentially in a new place.
Yeah. Fingers crossed. Well, I've always made, like, in comics, there's a bunch of different kinds of work, but there's work for hire work, which is like the licensed comics, the stuff about superheroes, or in my case, I draw like My Little Pony and Star Wars and Rick and Morty and stuff, Ninja Turtles. And then there's creator owned, which is these stories that the person comes up with themselves, and they pitch it to a publisher, or they just put it on the internet or whatever, but then they own the property themselves. And so I've always done creator owned stuff alongside of my my work for hire stuff. And like I said before, like you generally don't get paid for it. So this new book that's coming out in February is sort of my biggest book yet. Like I've always been at like smaller publishers and sort of just, like scrappy upstarts trying to get stuff out and get people to notice them. And this book is at the third biggest publisher in comics. It's basically Marvel, DC, and Image. And Image is the one that's putting out my book. And it's called Stray Dogs. And it's a story unique to my sensibilities, I think. I'm doing it with an artist named Trish Forstner. I wrote this one, and then she's the artist on it. But I still have a hand in it. Like I like we collaborate on the covers, and like I do layouts and stuff too. But she's like the heart of the thing. When you look at the artwork and it has emotions and stuff, that's her. But the book is called Stray Dogs, and the premise of it is basically there's a serial killer who takes trophies from his victims, and the trophies are the victims' dogs. And we tell the story from the perspective of the dogs, so it's like a Lady and the Tramp or like a Balto, like an animated style dog story. And the dogs don't know what's going on because they have dog minds, and so they just know, like, when it's time to eat, and they sort of know, like, they're not stupid, but they don't understand people stuff, like they don't know what cars, like how to turn a car on or anything like that. And so it's about them sort of like unraveling this mystery with their limited dog capacities and memories and stuff like that. And so like a 5-issue thing that's like a self-contained story that comes out from February until July this year.
How did you come up with the story?
Well, I feel like my best ideas come from, I'll see something else, or I'll hear about something else, and I'll go like, oh, you know what I wish that was? Like somebody will be doing a version of the thing that's not the thing. And I was watching Bates Motel, the Norman Bates TV show,
Mm-hmm.
And I left the room, and when I came back, Norman Bates had a puppy. And I was just like, did he kill somebody and take that puppy? Like as a trophy? And my friends were like, no, he didn't kill anybody. And I was just like, oh, I mean, cool.
You should have.
Buddy, yeah. But then from there, it was like immediately my mind went from like, there should be a killer that takes people's dogs to, oh, but you'd want to hear about it from the dog's POV, not the killer's POV, or not the cops or whatever. Like, that's something that you haven't seen before.
It's cool. I'm excited to see it come out. So the comic world is new to me, so forgive me for my lack of understanding. You put out the comic, then would you like to do another series of it? Would you start something different? Do you want to option that for a movie? What's next?
Well, yeah, the comic is self-contained, so like I don't have a sequel in mind. Like it's just sort of like a one solid story, and so they'll put out the 5 issues of the thing, and then they'll put out a collection. You've seen like graphic novels. They'll put out a graphic novel collection, and then that'll hopefully lead me into whatever my next thing is. I have like a notebook and a document that's like all the next stories that I have, and they're all pretty much similarly self-contained stories. There are a few that go on, but I don't have like a Spider-Man in mind where it'll go on for 1,000 issues. I tend to think of stuff in terms of like a concise story that I can put like a nice beginning and a nice end on. Like I like them to match up. I like using like symmetry and stuff like that. But there is like, we did option it as a movie already, so that part is taken care of, which is which is nice. That's sort of one of the things in comics is that like so many of these books will come out and they'll do okay and you'll make a little bit of money on it, but like it's expensive to live anywhere. It's expensive to live where I live, so it's not like a sure thing that this would come out and pay all my bills for the whole time it was coming out. And luckily we optioned this to Paramount Animation like before it even came out as an animated movie. And we just finally signed the contract. We did the deal in July, and we just finally signed the contracts a couple of weeks ago. So that's like actual money that we can live on for a little bit. And then hopefully they'll make a movie of it, but how like options mean they're just going to give it a shot and see if they want to do it. And then if they come back and say, hey, we really want to do it, then we get like actual for real money. Like right now, pretty great. But 18 months from now or a year from now, they could come back and say, hey, we're doing it. And then it would just be like a game changer. I could take a year off and work on whatever I wanted, or I could, invest or whatever.
Think of how many Gilmore Girls episodes you could watch.
Well, luckily, what I learned was that I could just set a TV up next to my art station or stream it on my iPad. And Gilmore Girls is almost like radio, so I don't have to look at it so much as just keep an ear open.
It's so cool to see what's possible for you and what you've done already to go to LA like so many people and, I'm going to do this, and then to actually make it real. So what's your next big thing. I mean, when you were in Sioux Falls, the big thing was I'm going to actually go be an artist.
Yeah.
And I'm going to actually go do my creative work on my own terms. What's the big next thing besides walking the red carpet and getting your Academy Award or whatever it is you're going to get,
Yeah. Well, fingers crossed on that.
You could be on Dancing with the Stars someday, Tony. Like, think of all the things you can do.
I'm sure you've seen me dance. I don't think that is in the cards at all. I wouldn't even be like the funny one where they're like, he's not coordinated. No, the next, like, I'm sort of on track. On track isn't really the word. Like, I'm pointed in the direction I want to be pointed. Like, my goals are sort of evolving, and my first goal was to make comics. Like, that was my goal growing up, and as a kid, like, make comics, have them published, people read them. And I did that. That was sort of what happened when I still worked at the news station in South Dakota. And then that goal evolved to get hired to make comics. Like, people come find me, they like my work, and they'll give, like, pay my bills so I can do this thing that I love. And that's what I've been doing for like the past 8 or 9 years. And then the ultimate goal is to just make my own comics and have that be the thing that I live on, like, have that be the thing that is hopefully successful enough that I don't have to do any other stuff. But that's rarefied air. Like, it's super rare that people can do that. And generally what you have to do is, like, I work in licensed comics and kids comics for the most part, My Little Pony, and the Star Wars stuff that I do is like the Star Wars kids comic. And those don't have the same sort of fan base as, like, if I had drawn, like the regular Spider-Man book or the regular X-Men or whatever. But even those people that draw those sometimes can't just go and make their own stuff and make a living at it, but you build an audience that wants to go with you to the next thing. And then hopefully those people will come with you, and sort of, like, instead of giving half of your money or 75% of your money to Warner Brothers or Disney, you just keep all of it for yourself, or however much of it. But the goal is to just make my own stuff and make my own way, like, stand on my own, to have it be my stories that people are coming around for. They don't just like, My Little Pony, or they don't just like Star Wars. They're there because they like the stuff I do. But it seems like a real dicey proposition. So we'll see. I'm sort of halfway. I feel like I'm headed in the right direction, but it's not anywhere near a sure thing.
I love how you talked about your goals evolving and the importance of keeping goals fresh, because there's many points in your career where I feel like you could have said, I'm good. Look, there's my name on a comic. I'm good. I did it. But you keep chasing, the staying hungry and keep evolving is so important just in life. So what was it like when you saw, I don't know, what was a bigger deal for you? Being able to draw Star Wars, which is something you loved way before, you got to draw it, or seeing your name on the very first thing you did? Or is it Stray Dogs? Like, what's the thing where you, or maybe you don't. People ask me this too. Like, do you ever look back and say, look at what you've built? And, like, who's got time for that? But I'm curious, like, do you ever do that?
I think I do more than like my friends do or other people that I know. I'm a little bit sentimental about it. And I think, like, all three of those things that you mentioned were all a pretty huge deal, like the first time, like, being in a comic store on the day that my first comic went up on shelves in the comic store, and, like, signing it and having, like, it was in South Dakota, like, it was at Rainbow in Sioux Falls. And we just had, like, a party, and people came through and they knew it was coming and they were excited about it. That was probably the biggest, like, the one that felt the best. But then everything else feels cool, like, I love Star Wars. Like, some people love their family. So, when all of a sudden I'm drawing Star Wars characters and I'm drawing R2-D2 and Chewbacca and stuff, that was enormous for me. But it is, like, those are both just, like, goals that I had, and then sort of push through and knock them down, and move on to the next one.
So let's go into the future, and you're doing all your own stuff, and people are coming to you because of you and your point of view and your art and your creative and all of that. And you could live anywhere you want. But if you stay in LA, you know that you have to hustle a little bit more because it is more expensive. You go back to Sioux Falls, there's no sales tax or no state tax and all these things. And they, the beers might be 50 cents now. I don't know. They were 25 cents when we were having them. But
Right.
would you choose to stay at a place just for conversation's sake, stay at a place that made you fight and battle? Or would you go someplace where, I could take it easy a little bit financially?
I don't know. I think about it, but I haven't nailed it down to like where I would go. It's weird because I'm the person in my family that, I come from a large family. I have 4 brothers and sisters, and my dad, when he got out of college, or when he went to college, he left his hometown. He went from Nebraska to the East Coast, and then he just moved to wherever after that. And I always thought like, oh, I guess that's what you do. Like you get old enough and then you move away. But then none of my other brothers and sisters did. Not because they weren't ambitious, but just because they were like, oh, we like it here. So I guess often I think about maybe I would just go back there. They live in Colorado. I don't have besides wanting to be around my family, I don't have the pull to anything there necessarily. We're just like, oh, I really miss the Colorado, green chili or whatever, like the thing that they have. But that's not to say LA is better. Like I work so much that I don't even really get to enjoy the LA stuff, but I like knowing that it's there. When the world's turned on and everything's working and you can be around people, like I like knowing that like we have film festivals and we have, all the weird little things I can go and just like right before the pandemic happened, I went to like a Italian Giallo festival, which is like 1970s Italian slasher movies. And just a buddy of mine, we just went and sat and just watched these weirdo, movies that some of them I've heard of, but some of them I never heard of before. And I was just like, this is crazy that they just put, this is just a Sunday out here. It's not like we heard about it for weeks and then we got excited for it. It's just like, oh, you want to go see that thing? So I sort of that's what I like about LA is just the idea that there's always something, But yeah, like I said, it's impossible to survive out here unless you're really, really killing it. But I'm doing like medium, I'm doing pretty good. So I'm fine, but I don't own anything, So.
But being an artist is one of those things where most people don't know very many people who that's what they do full time.
Yeah.
So even that you're doing what you're doing and you're doing medium, which medium in LA is great. So, again, I said it before, but congratulations to take a dream that's really doing what you're doing. What percentage of people actually ever get there? It's not like being an accountant where, lots and lots of people do it. It's a really small number of people that ever get to do what you're doing. So
for sure. Cool. Yeah. Yeah. There's like probably a couple thousand of us at a time, like in the world. And that is pretty neat. But I think like I had a direction all along. Like I always knew I wanted to do this, which a lot of people don't. Like they'll just not some of my siblings don't know exactly what they want to do eventually. And so they'll just sort of do whatever until they figure out what they want to do more than that, So I feel fortunate that I always knew just like, oh, I just want to do this one thing. And I could sort of be single-minded about it. But again, like that also has its negative. I'm sort of single-minded about it and I do too much. So that can be a problem.
So when the book comes out, people can get it at their local comic book store, bookstore, online. Where do you want? What's best for you, Tony? Where should I buy it?
What would be the best is if you heard the premise and you're like, oh, I'd like to read that. Call up your local comic store. If you don't know what it is, there's like a local comic store finder. You can just Google like find a local comic store and punch in your zip and then they'll tell you what your closest one is. And you just call them up and you say, hey, I want to read Stray Dogs from Image Comics when it comes out. And then they'll order it for you and they'll call you when it comes up. Comics industry is very strange in that you have to order, stores have to order their stuff 3 months before it actually comes out. Or they have to start thinking about what they're going to order 3 months before it comes out. And so it's this backwards situation where if there's something new coming that you want, you have to tell your store about it. Because otherwise they might just skip it and only get the stuff that they already sell. They might only get Star Wars or Spider-Man. So yeah, if you want to read it, call your local comic store and say, please get me Stray Dogs. Now, if you don't care about having the paper comic and you just want to read it, it'll be available on like iTunes and Comixology, which is Amazon's online comic reader, like Kindle for comics. and all like the online places you can read comics. It'll be impossible to miss, especially like if you follow me on social media. I'll be talking about it constantly.
If before I ask the very final question, I have one other question. If you could go back and do anything different in your career, is there something as an artist that you could go back and do differently that would have helped you get to where you are faster? Or are you pretty grateful that all paths pointed to where you are today?
I always think about the fundamental stuff that I would have studied harder and paid more attention to, but that's like deep in the weeds. Like, oh, I wish I had a better grasp on perspective, or I wish I had a better grasp on figure drawing or whatever. And that's stuff that like I know how to do, but I see people that learn their fundamentals much like have a much more solid grasp of it, and it makes them so much faster because there's not so much double checking yourself or second guessing yourself, erasing. And so I feel like if I could do it over again, I would really hit that stuff a lot harder than I did. But yeah, otherwise, I mean, I don't think I couldn't pinpoint what I would have done differently to get the outcome that I'm looking to get. You know, like I can see places where I could go like, well, if I wanted to do that, I could have done this and that. But the specific thing that I want, where I just want to make my own stuff and have people buy it and be like like a Bone, Jeff Smith, who makes the book, or one of these guys that just is completely self-contained. I feel like I'm headed hopefully in the right direction.
Well, until you have a team of people making your
Right.
ideas, right? Then think of all you can get done.
Yeah, that would be a nice something I could sort of rest and sit back and take it a little bit easier. Because for real, right now, if I have an idea, I have to sort of do all the work to get it up on its feet and sort of like make sure that I'm holding it up the whole time. You know, like it's like a physical thing that I have to build and hold up and put together until it's out, and then I can just sort of let it be out there. Right now, we've got 4 issues of Stray Dogs out of 5 almost finished, and it'll start coming out in February. So it's just sort of like all these little pieces that, you know, if that lady from the news station came and deleted my hard drive right now, I would be completely destroyed.
You would take her puppy? Is that what you're telling me?
I would murder her and take her puppy as a trophy.
Oh boy, full circle. Back to the newsroom. All roads point back to the Keller newsroom.
They seem to.
Yeah. So the last question is, what's interesting about your story, unlike some of the other stories I've had on the podcast, is that some people take their career or their personal life takes something happens and there's like this dramatic turn. And yours really is, I knew I wanted to do this way over here, and I had to keep kind of shifting and turning. And, you know, the flip your script concept, yours were little pages. It wasn't one big, completely flip it over, but you had to be pretty brave and pretty courageous to, okay, I'm going to move out. I'm going to be totally broke and move out to LA. And like, I'm still doing the dream. So that's what I think about your story is so applicable to a lot of people, because not everyone has that big moment where they have to make some kind of life or death choice. It's the kind of the choices you make every day along the way that get you to where you're going. So thank you for sharing all of that. So the last question, is there a quote or a song or something that motivated you along the way to flip your script?
I mean, it's not like a deep quote. I just always think about the idea of leaps of faith, you know? And I'm not like a man of faith myself. Like I'm not a religious person, but I believe in myself and like what I'm trying to do to a certain extent, and enough that I can go like, all right, well, what do I have to lose by making this next move? You know, like, and in the terms of like moving from a safe place in South Dakota where my rent was $300 to moving out to LA where it was like multiple times that, I had a lot to lose, but also I didn't, you know, like I was a young person. I wasn't married. I didn't have kids. And so I could just sort of like move my whole thing and just like take a crack at it. That was not as directional as what most of the other moves have been, where it's just like, all right, well, now I'm going to make stuff, or now I'm going to submit to these publishers, or now I'm going to meet these people and show them my work. But all of it has always been like a leap of faith. Like, do I believe in myself enough that I can just take this flyer and see if it works? And that's what I feel like has propelled me, you know, taking me from one level to the next level to the next level. And hopefully it continues to.
No, that your answer is a great one, because you take the leap of faith and trust in your own gifts, talents. I mean, essentially it's trust your dream and keep working for it. Because if you don't, 10 years go by and you're still sitting in the same place wondering, what if I would have done that?
Right. But you feel like when you're not tired of doing a thing, but you're just like, okay, I've got this figured out. Like I could just put this on autopilot, and knock this thing out. Like I could just draw My Little Pony comics into eternity without too much struggle. Cause it's just like, oh, I know how to do this. But I also got to a point where I was like, okay, I've got this. I know how to do this. So now what else, And I feel like I'm always going to be wondering what else because I have so much other stuff that I want to do.
Thank you. And I think the other part of your story that's so valuable is to the woman who deleted the files. Like, thank goodness she did, right?
Yeah.
Thank goodness she did.
Yeah, it was a real kick in the ass, like I would have been content to live there for a while longer. Like we had fun, like it was a fun place to be. But once something gets poisoned like that, it's just like you can't, I could not have stayed there and been angry about my job any more than I already was as like a little ragey, 20-something Midwestern white kid. Like I was already a little bit misanthropic. I think if I had to go into that place where my work had been completely deleted for another year, I think that would have been too much for me.
In listening to Tony's story, the value of having something happen to you and turning it into something that motivates you is really valuable and applies to, I think, things that happen to all of us every day. But I love the concept of believing in your dreams and working for it, and that will take hustle. And also, it's really important to stay hungry. The minute you get really comfortable, whether it's financial or wherever it may be, you miss the opportunity to see what's next. And there's so much value in evolving your goals, making goals and evolving them. My hope is that Tony's story empowers you to believe you're capable of more than you think, to discover motivation, to uncover inspiration, and to find the strength to turn the page.
Thank you for listening to Flip Your Script, hosted by Christy Peel and produced by Media Minefield. If you like our message, please be sure to give us a 5-star rating, subscribe to the show, and share our episodes with your family and friends. Do you or someone you know have a story about flipping your script? We'd love to share it. Contact us on our website, flipyourscriptpodcast.com. To stay up to date on all things Flip Your Script, make sure to follow host Christy Peel on social media. You can also check out the website for pictures, resources mentioned in the show, and other great episodes.